Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. Or if you're catching it on the replay, thanks for catching the replay. My name is Jenna, and I am the astrologer behind Frequency Astrology. I am also a member of the Moira Press, which is a group of astrologers, clowns as well, comic relief. We do a lot of really intense work and really intense offerings for all levels of astrology with a particular passion for advanced astrologers. Today, we're actually going to be talking about something a little bit different, something that's a passion of mine, the intersectionality of astrology and adoption. Now, why is this a particularly important topic to me? Well, it's because I'm an adoptee. So being an adoptee means that I have the lived experience of adoption. I also want to say that while I will be talking about adoption during this live stream and recording, I am not speaking on behalf of all adoptees. I am speaking on behalf of myself and my own lived experience. I'm also going to be pulling from my work as an adoptee professional. So not only do I have personal lived experience, but I have professional experience. I currently work for the nonprofit organization Adoption Mosaic, based out of Portland, Oregon. I am their social media manager as well as a course assistant facilitator for their adoptive parenting courses. Specifically seasoned parents, which is for adoptive parents with children, adopted children who are 18 and older, as well as navigating estrangement, which is for adoptive parents who are at any degree of estrangement from or possibly dealing with estrangement or the possibility of estrangement from their own adopted children. These are both, well, I'm not a seasoned parent, but I have personal experience with estrangement from both my adoptive family as well as my birth mother and her family. I have reconciled with my adoptive family and we are in community now. That being said, my work as an astrologer overlaps that because I bring my knowledge, my lens, my spiritual understanding of adoption into these classrooms and into my consultation room with other adoptees. As much as I see different astrological clients that aren't adopted or that aren't a part of an adoption family or part of what we call the adoption constellation, I have a particular affinity and enjoyment for working with people that are either adoptees or people within the adoption constellation, birth families, adoptive parents. And I particularly enjoy the nuance of early reunion. So we're already talking about kind of heavy topics, big emotions, big trauma processing opportunities, a lot of that coming up and really taking that opportunity to help my clients move through a lot of these psychological truths that have either been buried or intentionally pushed into the subconscious or unconscious or just have laid dormant there. And that actually is going to come up during this examination and discussion of Katherine's chart. So what happened was on Monday, the news broke that a very famous person in Hollywood passed away. And it did come out pretty quickly after that it was actually a suicide. And her name was Katherine Short. And I remember seeing the headline, which was like, Martin Short, his daughter, age 42, passed away or died. And I remember immediately thinking, oh, she's 42. She's in her Pluto square. Now, the Pluto square is something when it usually happens around, especially for our millennial generation, and as well as Gen Z, and as well as above us, Gen X, we're all going to be going through this at roughly the same age, early 40s. And what the Pluto square is it's saying that your Pluto in your birth chart is experiencing activation from a 90-degree angle, a square angle. And what's going to come up at that time, Pluto is the god of hell, a lot of really deep psychological truths that perhaps you it's not that you were avoiding them before, it's that they just weren't coming to the surface yet. And at this point in your life, as the astrology would say, you are ready to face these truths, but you are barely ready. This is going to be a time of inner turmoil. Square aspects are generally experienced internally as a sense of tension. So there's going to be a lot of tension coming up from inside around these deep psychological truths, and maybe things that you hadn't put together before, or revelations about, you know, different traumas that you had, or just the way you experience the world. It's like getting real with the deep psychological nature of yourself. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. All right, share screen. And we can see right here, this is Katherine Short's natal chart. Now, we don't have a time of birth. We only have a date. And we also don't have a location. I did find that she is a U.S. domestic adoptee, which means she was born, her birth mother gave birth to her in the United States, and she was then placed with a family inside the United States, which means domestic adoptee. And since she grew up in Los Angeles, I placed it in Los Angeles. And generally, when you don't have a time of birth, you set a noon time, because what we're looking at really is this moon right here. You see her moon? It places it for noon at 2 degrees of Sagittarius. However, the moon moves about 12 degrees in a day. So had she been born right after midnight, she would have been a Scorpio moon. Or had she been born at the later end of the day, closing in on December 4th instead of December 3rd, she would have been a later Sagittarius moon. I did the calculations earlier, and as of 12:01 a.m., it was a 24-degree, 29-minute Scorpio moon. And then at the end of the day, it was a 7-degree Sagittarius moon. So we have about an almost even split on both sides. And we can't really know without knowing her personally, and doing rectification work is very specific work for trying to nail down a birth time. It's very much possible, but it's not something that you can do without having a significant amount of information with which to base your technical analysis on. But in either case, in looking at this chart, we do see that her moon is going to be somewhere closing in on this Uranus and this sun here. But everything else in the chart pretty much stays the same. As far as planetary degree placements go, we're not going to know the signs of the houses. We're not going to know the house cusps. And the other thing that we're actually not going to know either is if her Mercury really is at this anaretic degree. 29 degrees is a very specific and important degree. It is called the anaretic degree because there is this sense of urgency around it. And as of 10:20 a.m. on December 3rd, 1983, the Mercury had moved from the 28 degrees and 59 minutes to 29 degrees. So it is sort of safe to say that she's closing in on that anaretic degree. But again, we won't know for certain unless we were to have an accurate birth time, and there just isn't one. Now, I've seen a couple different people looking at her chart on social media, and they weren't looking at it through an adoptee lens. They were looking at it just through, this is a person who passed away, self-inflicted suicide. But what they didn't perhaps recognize was the significance of the fact that she's adopted, and the fact that we can look to her chart to find the imprint of that. Now, I said before that I've done a lot of work, astrological work, as well as just professional work with adoptees. And in my astrology meetings, I have noticed over the years a number of patterns that we can see in adoptee charts. Now, once again, if you are an adoptee and you run your chart and you don't see this pattern, that's okay. It's still very much valid, whether you identify as having relinquishment trauma, whether you don't identify, whether you say, oh, I had a great adoption and I actually don't resonate with having trauma from it. All of those experiences, all of those retellings, you are the expert of your own story. They're all valid. However, I am also going to say that in my counseling room and in my world of adoptees, whether they're just friends that are adoptees or they are my clients, I have seen a significant amount of adoptee charts that have these core patterns. And what are these patterns? Well, first of all, we always want to pull Chiron. Chiron is an asteroid, and I know it's not a planet. However, to me, it is one of the most important aspects in a chart, one of the most important points in a chart. It is heavily significant in my chart, which is probably why I feel that way, but it also seems to be very significant in adoptee charts. And we can see in Katherine's chart that Chiron is right here at the anaretic degree of Taurus, which, there's going to be a lot of people that had that degree that were born in December of 1983, and they're not all adoptees. Yes, that's true. However, when we look at the rest of the chart and we start to put together the different pieces, I would really love to know the degree of her moon, because if it is in opposition to this Chiron, that's the second thing that I look at in adoptee charts. So the first one is a prominent placement of Chiron. The second is some sort of interaspect between the moon placement and the Chiron placement. Right now we are seeing an opposition because we can give an orb up to 10 degrees for the moon. So whether she was born very early in the morning and it was 24, 25 degrees of Scorpio, that 4-degree orb still valid. And then as it comes across, we're going to get exactitude at 29 degrees of Scorpio. Here in this map, it's about a 3-degree orb, still very tight. The moon is very much working on integration, is really the highest form of working. This is called an opposition, that 180-degree angle. That's the highest form of working with it. But even if we go all the way to the last minute of night on December 3rd, it's only at 7 degrees, which is an 8-degree orb away from this 29-degree Chiron. So this moon is in conversation with Chiron. The last thing that I look for, or the third point that I look for in adoptee charts that tends to have some level of significance, is the asteroid Ceres, or Ceres, depending on your pronunciation. And if you know the story of Demeter and Persephone, so if you're not familiar with mythology, Demeter was Persephone's mom, and Persephone was taken to the underworld by Hades, Pluto, taken to the underworld, and she actually fell in love with Hades, and her mother, Demeter, was so traumatized by this, the severance of that bond between mother and child, and she longed for her daughter. She longed for that connection. Wintertime, she couldn't do Demeter's normal. She's about the abundance, the fertility of the crops, the harvest season, all of that. She wasn't able to keep that going here on Earth because she was so stricken with grief. Then it came that she was able to get in touch with her daughter, contact her daughter. Her daughter returned. They had a big reunion celebration, springtime, and they were back together once more. And Demeter said to Persephone, that was awful. Like, please don't leave me again. Like, I'm so glad that you're back. But Persephone was kind of torn because she loved Hades. She loved, her life in the underworld. That was the god that she had fallen for. She also loved her mother. So they ended up, they ended up coming to an agreement where Persephone would spend 6 months with Hades in the underworld, known as winter, and she would spend 6 months with her mother Demeter, and they would reunite and spend that time together, spring into summer. And that cycle would just continue year after year. So in one word, what Ceres can signify in a chart is abandonment. Now, the minute we start talking about abandonment, it's very clear the connection to adoption and adoptees, because when we talk about adoption trauma, we're not talking about what happened within the adoption necessarily. We're talking about what happened before. We're talking about the severance. We're talking about the loss that the child experienced. Even babies experience this. They very much experience it. It's called the primal wound, because it's this primal severance that honestly the baby experiences as completely life-threatening. Because in the wild, if a baby is separated, a baby with no defenses, no way to feed itself, no way to move, no way to shelter, no way to defend itself, is separated from that mother, from that caregiver, it is a life-threatening situation. So that is how the baby experiences what is going on. They don't have the context, the intellect to understand the substitution of someone else, of this new family. Yes, they can lean into the safety of, I am getting nourishment, I am getting cared for, but their nervous system is still in this heightened state of arousal. So when we talk about adoptees, especially adoptees that, there was this separation in either infancy or really early young childhood, a lot of that trauma and the wiring of the mind is all created, all those synapses, all the neuroplasticity, all of it, it's all formed in duress and in this state of heightened arousal. So adoptees end up having this baseline of higher levels of arousal, which follows us through life. And what can happen with that is, in turn, we suffer from higher rates of mental illness. We are overrepresented in mental health facilities. We are also overrepresented in prison populations. We are also overrepresented in suicide statistics. So when I saw Katherine Short, 42 years old, definitely going through her Pluto square, and then I saw she was adopted, as much as I don't know didn't know this woman, however we want to phrase that, I feel her as part of my community. My astrological community. She's only 2 years older than me, so part of my Pluto square generation currently right now, the early degrees of Scorpio Pluto generation that's going through this really upending time of life. And everyone goes through it that makes it to this age, so we're gonna be okay, everyone. But then also knowing that she was an adoptee gives me a lot more context for interpreting her chart and kind of understanding perhaps a little bit more of the nuance behind what was going on. So the first thing there's been a lot of first things. The next thing I wanted to point out is that in this chart, there's always things that jump out at different astrologers, and someone will say, oh, this is the most important part of it, or that is the most important part of it. Some people, the sun is 10% of the overall chart, and while 10% doesn't seem that much, the sun, that is the biggest percentage. So let's start with the sun. Or, oh, there's all this Sagittarius energy. We must start talking about what Sagittarius is about. For me, I kind of lean into intuition, and I'm like, well, what jumped out first? And what jumped out to me first was actually right here. And it's this Saturn in Scorpio, the glyph for Saturn in Scorpio. And you see how it's just like this little dash right here? What that means is that this Saturn is unaspected. Of the Ptolemaic aspects, which are conjunctions, so planets right next to each other, oppositions, like we saw with Chiron to the moon, squares, which she actually doesn't have any in her chart, but that would look like that red line that's a little bit shorter and coming in at a 90-degree angle. And then also the flowing angles are part of the 5 Ptolemaic aspects. We have the trine right here, which is this harmonious angle, and then the sextile. The trine is 120 degrees and the sextile is 60 degrees. Now, blue angles, the trine and the sextile, they're considered the easy aspects. Now, that doesn't mean life is great. It just means that there's no kind of tension or friction or road bumps in between these planets. They're working in a way that's kind of harmonious. They can also get lazy because of that. There's nothing itching them up into activity, so they can kind of become dormant or docile. Hard aspects, they stay itchy. They want to be attended to. The fusion of a conjunction, or the friction of an opposition, or the tension of a square aspect. Like, you kind of can't help but see it. It's like a mosquito biting you. But over here, Saturn, it's not in conversation with anyone. And as far as major aspects go, at least. So what can happen when we have an unaspected planet is there can be a preoccupation with that planet, because our psyche doesn't really understand this part of ourselves. It feels completely separate from the rest of us. What this Scorpio Saturn, or any Scorpio Saturn, wants is to eventually see some concrete result, which is very Saturn. Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn. We're talking about Earth, making it real, building something. Saturn's also about longevity, discipline, commitment over time. It wants that dedication. Saturn work is long-term work. So eventually, seeing the results of this commitment, Saturn wants commitment to Scorpio, hard inner psychological work, spiritual work that comes with this deep penetrating lens, this deep penetrating inquiry. Well, what do we know about Katherine? She was a social worker. Talk about the long game of deep penetrating psychological work. I read today that she had a private practice in Los Angeles where she specialized in adoption, anxiety, depression, personality disorders, grief and loss, suicidality, and relationship difficulties. Now, these are all topics and areas that adoptees struggle with at a disproportionate rate as compared to the rest of the population. I am actually going to link 2 studies about this at the end of the live stream. I'll add it into the notes at the end. I'll figure out how to do that. There was a study that came out in 2013 that showed, it's on the PubMed. It showed that adoptees are 4 times as likely to attempt suicide than their peers. And there's actually been a more recent study that is by Lynn Zubov, and she's currently in the process of getting it published. However, there is a link to the preliminary results on it that it's actually more like 35 times, not percent, times more likely for an adopted person to attempt suicide in their lifetime. So we're talking about a vast discrepancy that can't help but kind of call our attention over to it. And this is an area of mental health that has been largely underfunded for years. And why is that? Well, a lot of adoptee professionals talk about the fact that adoption is an industry. And just like we saw that ad on the Super Bowl, not the halftime show, the commercial break there, the propaganda saying adoption is an option, and adoptees all around, especially adoptee influencers, are kind of like, what are you talking about? This is just propaganda. This isn't truth. Pregnancy decisions and parenting decisions are proven to be not correlated with each other. The book Relinquished deeply goes into this. Gretchen Sisson studied this extensively for over a decade. And it wasn't that she was searching for this information. It surfaced to her. It was like something that she couldn't ignore. Similar to when Paul Sunderland, who is an addiction specialist in the United Kingdom, started seeing the vast overrepresentation of adoptees in his addiction counseling and in rehab, he was like, what is going on here? This doesn't make any sense. A lot of professionals who are not adopted but become adoption professionals, it's because they start seeing these glaring patterns that aren't being addressed. And why is that? Because it challenges the mainstream narrative, rainbows and unicorns, as we call it at Adoption Mosaic, that says that adoption is love, adoption is beautiful, adoption is a win-win. And what we're finding out is that, yes, parts of it can be experienced that way, but it's so much more complicated and nuanced than that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have these giant discrepancies pointing to systemic problems and dropping the ball, basically, not setting families up for success, not setting adoptees up for success. All right, back to Saturn. So being that it's unaspected, so we know that this is something that Katherine connected into during her lifetime, because look at her extreme success and dedication to her social work and counseling, but it's unaspected. So we know that generally with unaspected planets, I've seen this a lot in my counseling room, the person whose chart it is does not see this part of themselves as easily as other people see it in them. So others probably were like seeing, oh my gosh, she's such a change maker. She's such a great therapist. She really understands this. She can grasp nuance and complexity and hold space for really intense topics. And generally what we see with that unaspected planet is the person living that experience struggles to really see the power and their ability in this area of their development, of their skills, of their life. And it's like, okay, well, she's a licensed social worker. What do you mean she didn't see it? But how many people can you think about, if we just pause and say, how many people do we know that, achieved a lot in school and built a business or became a professional or even a top in their field, but still didn't seem very confident, still didn't seem like they really understood the depth to which they were impacting their clients, their community, those around them. And what we know, of course, is that confidence comes from within and confidence comes from doing. I'm not saying that she's not confident, but what I'm saying, I really can't weigh in on that. I don't know her. But what I'm saying is that her chart suggests that one very real manifestation could be someone whose actual skill level was, first of all, well above what she thought it was. And second of all, much easier for others to see and for others to connect to. And to the confidence point in that, I'm going to roll in Chiron here because we have Chiron in Taurus. So Chiron in Taurus points us to, so Chiron in mythology, we're talking about, so Chiron was half human, half horse. His mother was human and she was raped and by a horse, and Chiron was a result of that. And when Chiron was born, he was not accepted into the human community. He was not accepted into any community. And even the centaurs could tell, yeah, you look like us, but you're not one of us. So he was rejected by them as well. He ended up actually not even being raised by his mother either. So there's just so much in this that screams like, of course, this is the asteroid that, among everything else, is also very much associated with adoption and adoption trauma. So Chiron in Taurus specifically points to this core wound around self-worth, safety, all these Taurian words and expressions and areas of life, the right to exist in the body and in the material world. Taurus is very concerned with inner resource as well as outer resource. And it's an earth sign, the tangibleness of earth. It's the first earth sign. It's fixed earth. It wants to dig its heels in and be here and stay sturdy and stay grounded. So with Chiron here, there can be this experience of instability, of scarcity, or feeling like you're not enough, which can make trusting other people or even grounding ourselves feel like really unsteady, feel like a fragile situation. You know, there's a lot of risk involved in that. Chiron in Taurus, this placement often creates a sensitivity around Taurian themes, such as money, possessions, body, pleasure. Again, I can't weigh in on Katherine specifically. I don't know her. I just know what Chiron in Taurus is about. And this can sometimes, these sensitivities can sometimes lead to an over-attachment or an avoidance of these things, an avoidance of money, an avoidance of possessions, but then an avoidance of body and pleasure, the separateness that can come from that, the avoidance of being in the body, of connecting to another body. There's some wealth of information in that. If I had the pleasure of having Katherine as a client of mine, I would spend a lot of time talking to her about how this Chiron is manifesting in her daily life, because we can talk about it on this spiritual level. That's what astrology is, knowing the spiritual level, but bringing it down into like the situational level and the behavioral level, even the emotional level, we can't really know for sure. Was she attuned to feeling scarcity around or feeling sensitive to scarcity? We don't know. Maybe that doesn't resonate with her. Maybe it's something she never thought about before. That's one of the gifts of astrology. Sometimes the way that astrology frames things, the astrological lens, can kind of put things together for us in ways that we hadn't thought about before. That was totally my experience the first time I got a reading. I was like, how does this person, this astrologer, know more about me than I know about myself? And I barely know them. Like, this is our first time having a conversation. But that is what this map provides for us. And there's so much wealth of information the more we add to it. So we know with Chiron, it's called the wounded healer, because the idea is these are wounds that we're born with that aren't necessarily any fault of our own. We can talk about it as past lives. We can talk about it as ancestral wounds. We can talk about it as it also can reverberate and echo forward into the childhood. So childhood wounding and the conditioning of society, any way that resonates with you is a good lens for how to think about this. But the idea with it is that as we heal that wound, we naturally become this kind of beacon of healing out into the world for other people with similar wounds, other people with either Chiron in Taurus wounds or wounds of Taurus, wounds around self-worth, wounds around safety that could be represented in a much different way in the chart. So healing coming for this Chiron in particular would come through slowly building, slowly is a Taurus word, building that inner security, slowly building self-trust, building a felt sense of worth that isn't dependent upon external validation. And at its highest expression, what this Chiron in Taurus becomes is that guide for helping others reclaim embodiment, worthiness, and sustainable stability. Now we know when we see this Chiron in Taurus and we see, do you see these lines right here? These two lines that create this beautiful, tall, pointing down in this chart, triangle. This is actually a very special aspect pattern, and it's called a yod. It's also called the finger of God, because the idea is that it's as if God, if that word resonates with you, spirit, whatever source, is pointing in this chart, pointing down at that Chiron, saying, this is the point. This is what you're here for. It's funny because I've heard Stephen Forrest particularly say that the one aspect pattern that might indicate someone being famous is this type of yod pattern. Now, I'm not saying that's why Katherine's famous, nothing like that. But the point is that when you have a map that has so much energy pointed at one thing and the development of one thing to the almost detriment of the development of other parts of your chart, there's almost this compulsive drive to develop that. So when we see musicians with almost a compulsive drive to develop their craft, or actors, or maybe it's somebody who has a compulsive drive to invent things. So like famous inventors, famous scientists, we often can see this yod pattern because it's saying, yeah, we're going to be really focused on the development of whatever is here at this is called the apex, whatever it's at the head of this triangle, whatever it's pointing to. And we talk about this because what ends up happening is, because there's this hyper development of this planet, other aspects of our life can kind of like fall by the wayside and not get as much of our attention. We talk so much, in popular culture about how, oh, they were a brilliant musician, but their love life and their family life and all that, it was awful, blah, blah, blah. Well, yeah, because they might have had this yod configuration saying, you're really just going to focus on your music. And unfortunately, everything else is just not going to be as important. Now, again, this isn't every single person that's famous or every single yod even. Doesn't necessarily, if you have a yod, it doesn't mean you necessarily are going to be famous. It just means there's a energy from the universe kind of saying like, hey, hint, hint, this is important. So the other thing I want to say about this Chiron, and we'll get back to the yod stuff, is that it's in Taurus. That's an earth sign. There's two other earth signs. We have Capricorn and we have Virgo. Katherine had no Virgo placements. Katherine had no Capricorn placements. There is a potential that some of her angles, if we had a birth time, would include some earth, such as her ascendant, this line right here, what was dawning over the horizon at the moment of her birth, or her midheaven, it could have been an earth sign. We don't know. Without her birth time, we won't know. But even so, even if the angles were, or some of them were earth, she has no other planets in earth. This Chiron is the earth expression, the earth body in her chart, and the only one. And when we look at this yod, the base of this yod, which is what we're tuning in order to activate this Chiron. They say with yods, or with any aspect pattern really, you don't want to focus on the apex planet. You don't want to focus necessarily, it will come, but what you want to focus on is the base, because this is the engine. And as you tune this engine and it gets ready to go and it really gets churning along, it blasts all that energy forward into that Chiron. So what's at the base of this yod? Well, Mercury and Pluto. So the base of this yod, Mercury and Pluto. Mercury rules an earth sign, Virgo. So there's a little bit of an earth tie-in. And Pluto in Scorpio, well, Pluto's very strong in Scorpio. Pluto is the modern ruler of Scorpio. What that means is that Pluto has an easier time expressing itself. It feels very dignified in this position. So this is going to be a very powerful Pluto. Everyone, pretty much all millennials have this Pluto in Scorpio. It's a very powerful placement. It makes us very penetrating. It makes us more psychological, more I want to give us more credit too. It makes us a little bit more resilient to deep psychological truths, or how many millennials do I know who love watching serial killer documentaries? It's nuts. It's that type of resiliency around these deep or even taboo topics. But what's the only other, save for the moon, we're going to leave that out, but what's the only other big placement in Scorpio? Well, it's Saturn. And we talked earlier about how strong this Saturn is because it's unaspected. It's kind of just out there doing its thing. This Saturn, so powerful, so developed, we can tell that from Katherine's life, is also in Scorpio. And what sign does Saturn rule? It rules one of the signs, is Capricorn. So we have two Earth rulers as the base of this, no other Earth planets at all, blasting into this Earth Chiron. This is so potent, so heavy with this drive to make it real, drive to build, drive to take things and manifest them into some sort of either physical form, tangible form, leaving evidence of some sort behind. And I bet it might resonate more with Katherine to say you're leaving evidence behind through the work you do with your clients, through the help that you give to your clients to help them to build better lives. It doesn't necessarily mean we're building a house. It's not that kind of building. It can be building in a more loosely based form. So she's built, speaking of building, to have this hyper focus on an Earth placement, but with no real energy to build upon it. Echoes of Earth energy with Saturn and Mercury as part of the base here. But in other words, what this can mean is Katherine could have felt really ungrounded in her work. And I don't mean her day-to-day work as a social worker, but her growth over her lifetime, her soul's evolution. Now, evolutionary astrology is primarily the type of astrology I practice where we talk about the nodes of the sun, of the moon. Right here, we have the south node and the north node, and the emotional imprint of the south node, the karma or habits of that past life coming in, repeating themselves. And hopefully during this lifetime, we are trying to integrate the wisdom of the opposition, the wisdom of the north node. The north node is considered nothing but a good suggestion because we're coming in through this south node. This represents us in our past life, the situations of our past life. If past life language doesn't resonate for you, we can say ancestral trauma, inner child work, early childhood, social or national traumas, systemic trauma, things like that, the history that we're coming in with. And when the reason why we're talking about it in kind of like this trauma or negative lens is because, well, that's the whole reason we're back again, is because something went wrong here and we're trying to remedy it by pulling in the wisdom of that opposition and integrating it. So knowing that Katherine came in with a significant amount of Sagittarius energy and familiarity with Sagittarian energy, and she's working to integrate Gemini energy. Well, I did say before that Mercury is the ruler of Virgo, and it is, but Mercury rules two zodiac signs, and the other one is Gemini. So this is actually not only one of the corners of the base of a very powerful yod in her chart, but it's also the ruler of her north node. It's also literally what she is meant to be trying to incorporate into this lifetime. Once again, we're pointed right back at this Mercury. I want to talk more about this Mercury because this is a placement that, over and over again in this chart, it's significant, it's significant, it's significant. But then here it is in Sagittarius, where it has a little bit of trouble expressing itself, but that's okay. So we're talking about a Mercury that's at the anaretic degree. We talked about that a little bit earlier. The 29th degree of any sign. As of 10:20 a.m. in California, on the day that Katherine was born, this Mercury is at the 29th degree. If she was born before 10:20 a.m., it's at the 28th degree. So it's not the anaretic degree. There is still a level of, we're at the end of the sign. We have the wisdom of the sign. We're coming to the close, to the end. It's almost like when you're really close to finishing first grade, you're almost in second grade. You have the whole wisdom of the year behind you and, the final stride to graduating first grade. You're still a first grader. You're not in second grade yet, but here you are. You're full of wisdom. First grade might not have been the most wisdomful. We can say ninth grade. You're at the end of ninth grade. You're almost in 10th grade. You just got to finish things up. But what we know about anaretic degrees is this is called a degree of fate. Funny, because we're talking about another anaretic degree. This definitely was at 29 degrees. And another finger of fate at the degree of fate. We also know there's another name for this Mercury, which is called the crisis degree. So she has this integration, this call to integrate for her soul's evolution that involves a planet, a ruling planet that is at a crisis degree. The anaretic degree also talks about a heightened awareness or a level of instability because there's this compulsion to kind of like bring forward everything we know, bring forward the wisdom of this entire sign. So that level of instability can definitely be felt. On top of that, this Mercury is what we call out of bounds. So you know how the Earth tilt, the axis that the Earth rotates on is at about 23 degrees, 23 and a half degrees. So when we take the equator of the Earth and we project it out into space, we got up 23, down 23. So if we take that up 23 and then just pretend and we'll project it down 23 too, that's called the celestial equator. And the sun can only go in between that because we're revolving around the sun. So we're in this kind of like constant communication within that realm, within that range. But the other planets can actually kind of go a little bit above or a little bit below. And that's called being out of bounds. It's out of the natural bounds of where the sun can go with that tilt of the Earth, the 23 and a half above and the 23 and a half below. So in Katherine's chart, we see her Mercury. I actually don't know if you guys can. Oh, you can't see this. Sorry. We see, you're just going to have to trust me, that the declination, which is the degree, is 25 degrees and 49 minutes. It's almost 26 degrees. That's well above 23 degrees. The exact extremes of it, I'm honestly not sure for Mercury. I know for the moon, but this is considered very out of bounds. Anything above, once you're out of bounds, you're cooking. And what out of bounds means is there's like this like level of like zany, wacky unpredictability to it. So we're already talking about a Mercury that is behaving in this kind of urgent, critical crisis way because of the anaretic degree. Now we're adding to it this like, whoa, like shocking, unpredictable, almost Uranian nature to this Mercury because it's out of bounds. So we can start to feel into like the work that Katherine was here to do had this level of like, whoa, like that's really shocking. Like we're watching, this is a high speed chase thriller like vibe to it, with also all this Scorpio resiliency thrown in. Like this is going to be like a psychological thriller for her to be working this North Node. Like there's a lot of depth and intensity within her North Node ruler, and as well as the aspects that it's making. So we know that there's going to be some level of like maybe wrestling with the truth here. We are talking about an out of bounds anaretic degree Mercury in Sagittarius. Sagittarius is all about faith and truth and meaning, seeking meaning. Sagittarius wants to connect the dots. Gemini is about like gathering all the things. Sagittarius is like, okay, let's figure out how these go together. Let's get all the information and put it together. Boom, there we go. There's the connection and we're good. What can happen though is if Sagittarius thinks it came to a conclusion and then it's all done, it can have this like illusion of clarity around things where it's like, are you really sure that that's the whole picture? So we know that this Mercury implies that there was a wrestling with the truth, or maybe a wrestling with clarity. There was maybe a breakdown around perceived clarity with it, feeling like redoing things constantly, or like that, you know, it could be potentially like, oh, I thought I was all set with that and now I'm not. Oh, and I can almost feel into, as I was preparing this, I could almost feel into Katherine's energy around this Mercury, because it's so hard to just grasp the energy of it, that it caused her to really second guess herself. There's other minor aspects in the chart that kind of point to this too, but this Mercury really embodies it a lot. There was just a lot that she was wrestling with, and seeing other people as mirrors, seeing other experiences as mirrors, feeling like, wait a minute, am I back at the starting line again? Like questioning herself, doubting herself, the process being so spirally and cyclical, and that being confused or conflated with, I'm not good enough, or, oh, I guess I didn't do well. I guess I didn't learn that lesson. So there can be this hit to self-worth, this hit to all this earth, this call for that Chiron and earth. Am I actually building something? Like it can almost be contributing to this sense of chaos in her life to have such a wild and unpredictable North Node ruler here. Now, remember what I said about the 29th degree being like the final day of 9th grade. You're still in 9th grade, but we skipped from 1st to 9th. But we have all the wisdom of 9th grade behind us, and we're practically a 10th grader. It's like, let's go, let's move on. Well, on the other hand, the other side of this sextile here, we have Pluto, the sextile that makes the yod I'm talking about, because you might see that there's another one right here, but that's here to Venus, and that's not part of the yod. But Pluto, at 1 degree of Scorpio, well, Pluto's practically at the first day of school. It might not be 9th grade. We're not trying to say everyone's going through 9th grade here, but this is the first day of Pluto's school of Scorpio. You're in that grade, but you just started, and you have everything to experience and learn. So the reason I bring this up is because these two planets, Mercury and Pluto, they are about 60 degrees separate from each other, which is a sextile, which is considered a flowing angle. However, by sign, this is not a sextile. Scorpio and Sagittarius are next to each other. By sign, this is a semi-sextile, and that is not an easy energy to incorporate. It's not an easy fusion. So we have a sextile by degree, but a semi-sextile by sign. So we know when we're talking about signs that border each other, that each one is correcting for the overabundance of the sign of the other side. Whether we're talking about Sagittarius correcting for the overabundance of Scorpio, or we're talking about, it goes both ways, Scorpio overcorrecting for an abundance of Sagittarius. So it's like we're saying Scorpio's intensity and Sagittarius truth-seeking. We're talking about depth of Scorpio. Scorpio wants to go deep, penetrating. And Sagittarius, it's ruled by Jupiter, optimism, expansion. What's over there? Let's go. So we're having depth meeting expansion. Scorpio wants to go all the way down, uncover what's hidden there and what's emotionally real about this. And while Sagittarius, on the other hand, it wants to rise up. It wants to make meaning out of things and then keep moving forward. So Scorpio can't, well, it can. Scorpio can have this ability to ground Sagittarius's tendency to kind of bypass or potentially overgeneralize. That would be like not as high of an expression of Sagittarius, but that's why we say the signs around it will correct for that. So Scorpio grounding any bypassing or overgeneralization of Sagittarius. And then on the other hand, Sagittarius is there helping Scorpio out, because sometimes Scorpio can get really stuck in the intensity or stuck in this place of needing control or feeling control because it really wants to get deep and penetrate. Oh, no, keep going. Psychological, boom, boom. Really penetrating energy there. So Sagittarius is basically like, come on, lighten up. So this could work if Scorpio loosens its grip a little bit, and if Sagittarius is willing to kind of stay the course, stay in place, and go deeper into things. So the reason I bring this up is because this is the base of the yod. It's desperately trying to work these energies together. So there's this thrust of power that's trying to come through this sextile and blast into the apex. But the key here is tuning this space to get that sextile or semi-sextile by sign working really well, that feeds this smooth power into that apex planet, and it will become very dominant in your life. So as Katherine went through these deep psychological processes in her life, and went to school to become a therapist, and then engaged in Mercury, the messenger of the gods. It's about communicating, it's about perception, it's about talking, it's about listening. Doesn't that sound an awful lot like what we do in talk therapy with a social worker? So as she's developing both of these planets, they are simultaneously working together. She did a great job at that. She became literally a talk therapist and blasting energy into that Chiron and healing it. Now, in a straight sextile, this works pretty well together. But with a semi-sextile and straight sextile, meaning there is a sign in between them. So Sagittarius working with Libra, or Scorpio working with Capricorn, so that there's that sign in between. There's an affinity there between the fire to air or the water to earth, where they are used to working together. They work well together, just like we water the ground and things sprout up, just like we blow a little bit onto a fire and it rages out. These are energies that work well together. But with a semi-sextile, so now we're adding water and fire, it's like, wait a minute, which way do you want me to go with this? It's almost like if you had a piano in front of you and you close your eyes and you go to hit one of the keys, and when you go and strike the piano key, you actually hit the crack. And it's the two notes that are adjacent to each other and they play together. And you're like, whoa, that doesn't sound quite right. Sextile would be like if you're playing two notes with a note in between it. Like it sounds good. That's a harmony. Semi-sextile sounds like a clash. It's two notes next to each other. There's some tension there. Of course, sometimes in some songs, like you can add that in, and with everything going on around it, it can actually start to feel and sound right. It sounds an awful lot like if the rest of the chart is vibing well, then this gets a little bit more fluid, the semi-sextile by sign. But remembering that each sign is a reaction to the excess of the sign before it. So like too much Sagittarius needs that Scorpio, too much Scorpio benefits from that Sagittarius. Tuning that semi-sextile, understanding where that extra abundance is that the other's trying to compensate for and correct for, it actually becomes harder than a sextile. But it is the entire key to getting the entire triangle to unite and activate and ignite. So this would have been potentially a tricky area for her for, all the reasons that I mentioned. However, also a hyper focus point in her life, because we have this energy wanting to create this engine to blast forward. Now, I can't believe I talked for almost an hour and I haven't even showed you her transits yet, because like I said at the beginning, the first headline I read was that she was 42 years old, and that tells me Katherine Short is in her Pluto square. Now, what we're looking at here, this is called a biwheel, traditional biwheel. We have Katherine's chart still on the inside ring here. The little aspects that were in between are gone. And then outside here is the astrological weather of the day that she died, placed around her chart. Now, once again, we don't have a birth time, so this might be tilted in one direction or the other. We don't really know. Ignore the houses, ignore the ascendant, actually ignore all of the angles, because we just simply don't know. It is a coincidence. There's no such thing as a coincidence, but it is a coincidence that the sun is on her ascendant, the transiting sun. That is, if you know astrology, you know what I'm talking about. But you know what? Part of me thinks if you know astrology, you aren't even listening to what I'm saying, because you're like, oh my gosh, look at all the things going on in her chart. No wonder Jenna spent so long talking about Chiron. So we have Pluto here, 1 degree of Scorpio. And by square, 3 signs away, Scorpio, Sag, Capricorn, Aquarius, we have Pluto in the sky at 4 degrees. Now, this is it's separating at this point. She's been in her Pluto square. She's still in it because we do give an orb, especially because this Pluto is so potent and strong in her chart. It can be up to a 3.5 degrees from that 90 degree. So she's finally potentially feeling a little bit of relief around her Pluto square. She's been making it through. But you know what else has been going on at the same time is this really hellacious time of deep psychological epiphanies coming to her, potentially, things being taken from her even. Pluto can have a lot to do. Pluto is about death and rebirth. Maybe literally things were taken from her during this time. And I'm not talking about her life, but opportunities, relationships, things that she had outgrown that kind of needed to die away, but, and then all of a sudden something big is coming to the surface around that, some epiphany, actualization. It can also be a time when things happen to us that are very plutonic. It's almost impossible to predict the many ways that Pluto a Pluto square can happen. Not everyone's 40 through 42nd year of life looks the same, period. We all have unique experiences. And without knowing our houses, it makes it even more difficult because we don't know, is this an 8th house Pluto? Is the transiting Pluto coming in from her 12th house? We don't know. We do know she's in her Pluto square, though. We do know that this is a time of deep psychological truths, really uncomfortable truths coming to the surface. Maybe some of those truths were things around her adoption. Maybe those truths were things around, oh my gosh, I've been addressing my trauma. I've been addressing my psychological work. I've been addressing my healing in this way. And now I'm realizing that I actually have this abundant pile of work to do over here that I didn't realize was there. It can be all sorts of things that come up. I thought this was settled and it's not. I thought this relationship was good for me and it's not. Lots of different ways this can be coming out. In addition to that, transiting Uranus. Remember we talked before about shocking, unexpected things, especially the zaniness of that out of bounds Mercury. Well, Uranus is literally all about shocking, unforeseen, shake up things. It's earthquakes, life quakes, all of the above. So we have Uranus here shaking, shocking this Chiron, really activating this wound. Perhaps she was all of a sudden being jolted by Uranus into, it's almost like ripping this wound open in this very like via an earthquake type of way. Like, oh my gosh, I have this deep sense of fill in the blank with Chiron and Taurus, whatever that is, coming to the surface there. Now, these are long-term transits. These are the outer planets, which are, they're theme builders. These are over a few years. Pluto first entered Aquarius 2024. And then last year in 2025, it was deeply in Aquarius for most, if not all of the year. I'd have to check the dates to be sure. We're very much in Aquarius now. It is not going back into Capricorn. It has not gone back into Capricorn. We're in Aquarius now until the 2040s. And this is pretty much the all of the exactitude activation she had already experienced as of Monday. But coupling that energy that she just got through, and remember, it's stuff we're ready with Pluto. It's stuff we're ready to face, but we're barely ready to face. So she's still kind of feeling that emotional exhaustion at the least of what she just went through in her Pluto square. Then for another, and we talk about the outer planets as theme builders. So this theme of deep psychological revelations, penetrating truths coming to the surface, that's been a theme for a few years. Uranus, also a theme builder. Any planet from Saturn out is going to be a theme builder. So Uranus building these themes around her woundedness, around this Chiron, around self-worth, around, am I good enough? Do I know enough? Have I done enough? Am I really worthy? Am I worthy enough? That's all coming up at the same time. We talked about Ceres before. Ceres, Demeter and Persephone, in a word, abandonment. Well, what's happening in the sky right now? Ceres is in a conjunction with Chiron in the sky right now. That energy is fused together. It's trying to reconcile for people who have this type of wounding. This can really be activated right now. And, speaking to all adoptees, let's look at how we're feeling right now. We have the Epstein files that just came out. We have a lot of adoptees saying, hey, I was actually a victim of the Epstein files. I was a victim of Epstein. I was part of child trafficking. We have a lot of truths coming to the surface right now around how much trafficking does happen in adoption. We intercountry adoptees right now that are worried about being wrongfully detained by ICE or deported because maybe the adoption didn't go through quite right. I know so many adoptees that their paperwork was never fully filed correctly, and the adoption agencies are not held accountable for that. So we're kind of left in this limbo space. Imagine how terrifying that is for an international adoptee to have to explain to someone, hey, the nuances of adoption in this country mean that I can't actually show you the paperwork that you're demanding. So what are we going to do now? Like, that's a terrifying reality for a lot of adoptees right now. And for a lot of the people like me that are not at threat of that. I'm a domestic same race white adoptee. I have paperwork. There is no other country for me to potentially be sent to. But these are my friends. These are my close family. These are my coworkers. These are, my community is threatened right now. Let's add another one to the list. Have you guys seen that little punch monkey guy? That's gotten a lot of, it's this little baby monkey over in Japan that's living in captivity in a zoo, and his mother rejected him. So he was raised by the zookeepers, and they wanted him to have a stand-in mother. So they gave him a teddy bear. And now this little monkey is overly attached to his teddy bear and won't let it go and drags it around, and all the other monkeys are kind of rejecting him. And there's so much within this little monkey's story, within these photos, that adoptees are, especially adoptee influencers, are like, holy, whew, this is the adoptee experience right in front of us. And it's really activating right now for so many adoptees to witness all these injustices, see this mirror of ourselves in this little monkey. And then the rest of the world feels so bad for this monkey, but we're like, well, wait a minute. Nobody felt bad for me. You actually told me to be grateful and that nothing bad happened to me, and that love means to be given up, and my mother loved me and that's why she gave me up. Like, there's a lot of dissonance and confusion and invalidation that the adoptee community is experiencing through witnessing these adjacent or adoptee relevant, as Ostrich at Adoption Mosaic would say, dripping with adoption, these different things going on in society and humanity at large right now that are very much dripping with adoption. So yeah, all of us are experiencing, adoptees are experiencing the astrological weather of Ceres being conjunct Chiron in the sky. That energy of wounding meets wounding, abandonment meeting this undescribable wound that, is very, very jarring and penetrating, and we need to work through, and it can take our entire lives to do this work. That's Chiron. Chiron is a 51-year orbit. So at age 50 to 51, we have this like reckoning with Chiron, where it's like the wound comes to the surface and it's like, have you really dealt with this? So I've actually, at the beginning of my practice, almost everyone that was coming to me were people who were in their Chiron returns or had very significant Chiron activations. And I remember at the beginning being like, this is so strange. I have not had a Chiron return, but people are coming to me for Chiron advice. Well, then when I realized through my own chart, oh, of course, it's because Chiron is so prominently placed in my chart. And then as the work developed and years went on, I was like, oh, this actually is the universe trying to hone my understanding of Chiron, because as much as everyone has a Chiron wound, adopted or not, this is a particularly potent astrological part of the adoptee experience. Okay. So we have these energies in the sky right now. Katherine had Uranus adding this earthquake to her Chiron. Katherine also had Pluto in the sky, developing this theme around psychological intensity and things being unearthed. Well, what else do we need? There's honestly even more stuff if we wanted to really pull. We've been talking about Neptune and Saturn being together in the sky. And Neptune and Saturn moving into Aries the first time in our lifetimes for sure for Neptune, and all of the slamming that comes with. And it's like getting real about what we believe, getting real about our visions, building what we care about. There's so many people out there that are putting all this very well-intentioned energy into the things that they care deeply about and believe so much about. And the problem is that when we have so many people that feel that way on this side and also on this side, and they're actually against each other, both sides in their own realities are 100% correct. So that's very Neptune in Neptune conjunct Saturn in Aries. Remember, we're at 0 degrees and 1 degree. We're at the beginning. It is early in the school year. We all think we know everything, but we don't actually have the lessons yet. So make sure we're keeping that in mind. Okay, so the last thing we need when we're looking at transits like this, and then I'll wrap with that, is we have these big thematic ones, and then what we need is called triggers. Triggers are the fast-moving planets. We're talking about the luminaries, the sun and the moon, and we're talking about Mercury, Venus, and Mars. Well, we have those in abundance as well. So I put Katherine's death time at 6:41 p.m. in Hollywood on Monday. That is the time that the 911 call came in. That means that she shot herself before 6:41 p.m. The moon moves pretty fast. So if we even back this up, let me see, to 6:27 p.m., not even 15 minutes beforehand. Isn't that 15 minutes? 14 minutes. We have the moon, once again, anaretic degree, 29 degrees of Taurus. 29 degrees of Taurus. The moon acting as a trigger, coming across here. When we talk I went to Stephen Forrest's School for Evolutionary Astrology. He talks about that moon bringing up whatever emotional need there is. Like, what is it that this Chiron really wants? What can we bring to the surface? What does this Chiron really want? It's actually undergoing a lot of chaos right now through Uranus. I'm going to make this just 2. It's going through so much chaos. What does it need? It needs a break. It needs some relaxation. It needs some time away. It needs some love. It needs to feel better. We talk about, with the moon ruling Cancer, the moon is very water related, rejuvenation, restoration, coming back into the self, like that lunar energy of healing. And this is a wound. So what deeply are we wanting here? Some emotional healing, some just to feel better. Poor girl, woman. And then we have another activation too. So remember how I said, when I look at adoptee charts, we got prominent Chirons and we got prominent Ceres, and usually something with the moon, but we would definitely need an exact time of birth to know for sure where her moon falls on this. But we know where Ceres is, and we also know where Mars is. Mars in the sky, activating Ceres, adding this agitation to this one word, abandonment. There's so much going on here. We have these energies fusing together in the sky. Mars activating her natal Ceres here. We have Uranus on top of this Chiron that's the hyperfocal place of this chart. This is what you are here to do, Chiron work. And the moon coming along being like, are you okay? Like what do you need? What do you need? And it just speaks volumes to, yes, absolutely. This was a very painful time. This was a very intense chart, an intense amount of astrological weather that Katherine was going through. And again, I don't know her. I never met her, obviously. But a big part of me does feel that this is the chart of someone, and knowing what little I know about her life, this is someone who worked their chart, who did their best with this situation, with the energies, with the gifts, with the opportunities of the transits throughout her life. She did develop these placements. And remember what we talked about with the 29th degree? A lot of times we're talking about crisis. A lot of times we're talking about an urgency around something. Uranus in the mix, the discomfort, the shock, life quakes. What bigger life quake could there be than death? And here is the chart of her death, or close to it. I haven't looked at this chart on its own yet. I do a lot of emerging work with death charts. I haven't fully presented all my theories on it yet. I actually will be on March 11th with Ricky Williams on the Ricky Williams show. But until then, yeah, this is a very intense configuration, an intense chart, pointing to a lot going on in her life, going on in the sky. And the houses in this, we actually can say with pretty close certainty that this is the chart of her death. And what do we see but Chiron and Ceres? Remember, they were together in the sky. They're together in the sky in the 8th house, Pluto's house, the house of death. That doesn't necessarily mean when that happens that someone's going to die, but it's talking about, it's honoring the amount of psychological pain that this woman was in, the amount of turmoil that she was experiencing in herself, in her psyche. We also can see Uranus, shocking earthquakes, life quakes, all of that in this square aspect, tension to Mars in the sky. Mars is that warrior energy, aggression. It can also be assertion and leadership and courage and things like that. But yeah, it can be very victimizing, or it can be a victim. We have an aspect between the moon and Pluto. Whether it was a couple minutes, 14 minutes prior, and it's again an out of quality aspect. So we're not talking about air Aquarius to air Gemini, but we are talking about a Pluto aspect. So God of hell trying to interact through this aspect with that emotional energy, that emotional frequency. Again, this was energy that was in the sky on Monday that we were all experiencing. It's 6:41 p.m. in Hollywood, California. I'm over here on the East Coast. It was 9:41 p.m. on Monday night. Did I necessarily experience this the same way as Katherine Schwartz? No. Did other people? Probably not. Statistically speaking, no. But the way this energy interacted in her own natal chart, the way this energy was interacting in her constitution, her predisposition for what this energy was going to manifest, how this energy, these frequencies were going to move through her at this time. You can look at these charts and you can see the pain. You can see so much of just needing relief. All right. And with that, people are commenting. Sorry, everyone. Well, thank you, Danny. And thank you, Andy. And thank you, Debbie. Debbie, you might still be here. I'm going to read your comment and then I'm going to sign off. Debbie said, I get the feeling she had a problem with growing out of her childhood because her South Node conjunct her Jupiter, which is ruling the ceiling of her chart, and her Sun, vitality, playfulness, and that partile, semi-sextile. Yep. Don't dismiss that. You're totally right. With Saturn and Scorpio. Yeah. Minor aspects, definitely. They're so important. I'm obsessed with quintessiles. I didn't even touch on those. She does have a couple. But yeah, as far as the Ptolemaic aspects go, that Saturn is unaspected. But yeah, transiting Pluto, squaring that natal Pluto. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me. Please feel free to leave any questions or comments. I will update with those 2 studies on adoptees being overrepresented in suicidality. And I will see you again at a later date. Thanks so much.